Welcome to Kappa Delta Pi, International Honor Society in Education. Kappa Delta Pi, or KDP, was founded in 1911 by a professor at the University of Illinois. He wished to give students an opportunity for fellowship and an outlet to debate and study educational issues. What started as a club of 21 students has since evolved into an international society with an initiated membership that exceeds 1.2 million. Today's Kadelpians range from pre-service teachers to university faculty, K-12 educators to researchers, school counselors to principals, and so much more. KDP's scholarly journals, conferences, webinars, quarterly publications, networking events, and ready-to-use classroom resources ensure that our members are valued assets to their students and the schools they serve. We are proud to be their partners along their journey as an educator. Knowledge, duty, power. That's Kappa Delta Pi.
Emporia State University is a public university in Emporia, Kansas. Established in March 1863 as the Kansas State Normal School, we acknowledge that Emporia State University resides on the ancestral territory of several tribal nations, including the Kaw, Osage, and Shawnee peoples. Many Native nations utilize the Western Plains of Kansas as their hunting grounds, and others, such as the Delaware, were moved through this region during Indian removal efforts to make way for white settlers. It's important to acknowledge this, since this land serves as the foundation for this institution. Specifically, the university occupies the land taken from these nations. This land acknowledgement recognizes that Native Americans were traditional guardians of the land and that there is an enduring relationship between Native peoples and these traditional territories. In addition, we recognize, advocate, and support the sovereignty of the 4 federally recognized tribes of Kansas, the Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation, the Kickapoo Tribe in Kansas, the Sac and Fox Nation of Missouri in Kansas and Nebraska, and the Iowa Tribe of Kansas and Nebraska. We remember these truths because Emporia State's status rests on these dispossessions of indigenous peoples and nations from their lands. These truths are often invisible to many. The recognition that our history begins and continues through indigenous context is essential. Greetings. My name is Dr. Melissa Reed, and I have been the faculty advisor for the IOTA chapter of Kappa Delta Pi for the past 11 years. I would like to welcome you on behalf of the IOTA chapter members and the Teachers College here at Emporia State University. We are grateful for the members of our education community who are here in Kansas, those from other states, as well as our international friends who are present with us today to celebrate our 100th anniversary. At this time, I would like to introduce the co-advisor of the IOTA chapter, Dr. Heather Caswell.
Welcome. I'm going to read our proclamation. Proclamation in honor of the 100th anniversary of the IOTA chapter of Kappa Delta Pi International Honor Society for Educators. Whereas in the spring of the year 1917, President Thomas W. Butcher of the Kansas State Teachers College of Emporia, and then the Kansas State Normal School, appointed a committee of faculty members to work out a plan for official recognition of scholarship attainment. Whereas on March 15th, 1920, Dr. H.G. Lull and Franklin L. Gilson, the founding fathers of the IOTA chapter of Kappa Delta Pi at the Kansas State Teachers College, founded the 9th chapter of the Kappa Delta Pi International Honor Society for Education. Now, therefore, on March 20, 2020, Dr. Melissa Reed and Dr. Heather Caswell, the IOTA chapter of Kappa Delta Pi International Honor Society for Educators, faculty advisors, and associate professors in the Teachers College at Emporia State University, will host a special centennial celebration in the County of Lyon, especially on the 100th anniversary of its commencement in 2020. The members of the IOTA chapter invite you to join us in the Skille atrium of Visser Hall on the campus of Emporia State University at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on March 20th, 2020. Due to the COVID-19 global pandemic, on March 12th, Emporia State University canceled all campus events. On March 30th, Laura Kelly, the 48th governor of the state of Kansas, issued a statewide stay-at-home order. Therefore, the IOTA chapter has rescheduled the celebration for 4 o'clock in the afternoon on November 18th, 2020, virtually hosted at Emporia State University. The president of Emporia State University, Allison Garrett, was unable to be with us today, so she has recorded a welcoming message.
Hello. I'm Allison Garrett, the president of Emporia State University. It is my privilege to welcome you to celebrate the 100th anniversary of Kappa Delta Pi here at Emporia State. We're so honored to have you join us tonight, and I want to give you just a quick update on some things that are going on here at Emporia State, some great news that we're celebrating here at ESU. I don't know whether you followed some of the news out of Emporia State over the last few years, but I just wanted to share a little bit with you and to thank you for choosing Emporia State and for being a part of the Hornet Nation. You know, here at Emporia State, we are so proud that we are able to provide access to a quality college education to so many students. And one of the things that makes that access possible is a low debt for our graduates. For the last 5 years in a row, Emporia State graduates have had the lowest average debt when they graduate of students across the KBOR system. We're also pleased that our graduates have had the highest placement rate across the KBOR system over the last few years. So we're pleased that we've been able to offer those things to Emporia State graduates. We're also so pleased that we continue as an institution to lift up teachers like you. We're the home of the National Teachers Hall of Fame, and of course, about 3 years ago, we were delighted that Congress designated the Memorial to Fallen Educators as the National Memorial to Fallen Educators. Thank you for all that you do to educate students around Kansas and beyond. We're grateful to you, and we want to again welcome you to the 100th anniversary celebration.
We would like to welcome Amber Ellington with us. She is the West coordinator for the Kappa Delta Pi International, and she brings greetings from there.
Thank you, Dr. Reed. Hello, everyone. As Dr. Reed mentioned, my name is Amber Ellington, and I work at Kappa Delta Pi International Headquarters. Thank you all for being here. Even though we are meeting virtually, it is truly amazing to know how many people are coming together to celebrate this occasion. As you may know, the IOTA chapter is one of KDP's oldest chapters. Not only has its tenure been one of the longest standing among more than 700 chapters, but it is also one of the most consistent and successful year after year. On behalf of all of Kappa Delta Pi, I am here to offer congratulations to Dr. Reed and Dr. Caswell, their executive committee, and their entire membership. This is an occasion that has yet to be celebrated for many of our chapters, so congratulations all.
So I would like to introduce Mark Farr, president of the Kansas National Education Association, and an ESU alumni and a high school teacher who teaches science, to present on education in the past.
Heather, thanks for the opportunity to celebrate your centennial today. As a proud Emporia State alum, it's truly an honor to join with you as you celebrate this 100th birthday. It's hard to imagine what the world was like 100 years ago when your chapter was formed. The world was a different place. No internet, no computer. The telephone was a wired device. The airplane was a new invention. It's safe to say 1920 was a different world than we live in today. And I often find it hard to grasp what living in 1920 would have been like. As an educator, I find it challenging to picture what teaching would have been like in the rural areas of Kansas in 1920. My challenge this afternoon is to paint a picture of Kansas public education from the mid-1800s to today. To cover a 170-year timeline in a few minutes is a challenging task. I'll hit the headlights, or the highlights. I want to start by taking you back to 1886 and share the remarks of then Governor John Martin as he addressed a group of educators. He said, "The people of Kansas are proud of many things pertaining to their state, but above everything else, they place their schools. The loneliest region of our receding frontier has never been without a schoolhouse, a dugout or sod house at first perhaps, and these vanishing with the buffalo grass have given place to schoolhouses, always comfortable and generally the most stately building in the neighborhood. Indeed, it is the boast of Kansas that the best building in every town and hamlet is a schoolhouse, and we have 8,000 of them. They dot every hillside and valley and account for the fact that in Kansas, the proportion of people unable to read and write is smaller than any other state in the Union except one." I share this passage with you today to stress the value Kansas placed on quality public education. I want to share a few stats and photos and maybe dispute just how comfortable those early schoolhouses really were. If you'll bear with me as I grab my PowerPoint. In 1855, the first sod schoolhouse was built in Kansas. 5 years later, there were 154 schoolhouses in Kansas with 189 teachers. 25 years later, there were almost 7,000 schoolhouses and over 8,000 teachers in Kansas. And in 1896, there were over 9,000 school districts in Kansas. As you can see, Kansas truly valued the opportunity of education. I share with you a few photos of those early schoolhouses. This was a dugout schoolhouse in northwestern Kansas. You can see the challenges our educators must have faced working in those conditions. I share with you a teacher contract from 1904 that shared the salary for 8 months was $60. And the school teacher was tasked each day with making sure to light the wood stove or the coal stove in their community or in their school building, make sure and keep everything in good working order and maintain the building. In fact, the one-room school teacher did everything within that building. This one is the picture of this picture is near my home community of IOTA, Kansas, west central Kansas, from about 1890 something. And here we see in Decatur County a sod school with a sod roof. And it looks like a classroom of about 30 students and one educator. And the challenge, I think, was finding which one is the educator in this photo. Another example of a run-room school in Kansas. And as we move down the timeline, it looks like the buildings get better and the conditions that our teachers worked in probably better. And as we look at the one-room schoolhouse that was moved to Emporia State's campus, I'm going to say this was probably the Cadillac schoolhouse. It was really one of the best that I've seen. But what's happened over time in Kansas? Those one-room schoolhouses disappeared due to consolidation. We consolidated from that almost 9,000 school districts to 300 school districts across the state. I also share with you a teaching certificate from 1926 and share with you, as I did my research for this presentation today, that the first teachers in Kansas merely had to write their name, read a paragraph from a newspaper, answer a couple oral questions to prove they qualified to teach. In 1873, the Kansas legislature enacted the first Kansas State Board of Education, which was authorized only to examine prospective teachers and issue diplomas and certificates. County Normal Institutes under the governance of the state board was established to train teachers in 1877, and the state board was given the authority to accredit schools of education in 1893. In 1898, Emporia State University, then known as the Kansas State Normal School, was accredited. In 1947, laws were changed so that only the Board of Education could issue a certificate to teach. We know that during World War II, many teachers and potential teachers left the profession to assist a country at war. Class sizes increased as teacher shortages continued into the 1950s, when the first wave of baby boomers hit schools. Some certification requirements were relaxed. I have a video I'd like to share now with a video interview I did with my grandmother a few years ago. She taught in a one-room school. And I think you'll find that the issues that we face today in our schools were the same issues they faced then. Brian, would you start the video?
What did it take to become a teacher?
Well, we had 6 weeks at a college that we had to go to school to get our teacher's certificate during World War II.
So what 2 years did you teach?
I taught in nineteen 1944, 45, and 1945, 46.
And what kind of school did you teach in?
One-room school. We had stoves was coal burner stoves.
And where was the school located?
One was down by Hooker, Oklahoma, my first one. And the second one was out by Pence.
In Oklahoma?
No, here
In
Scott
Scott.
County.
Scott County. And how do you remember how much you were paid a month?
$137 a month.
And were you responsible? What grades did you teach?
All 8th grades.
All 8 grades. And
Yeah.
at that time there wasn't a kindergarten, it was just first through 8?
Just first through 8.
And how many students approximately did you have?
I had, the first school I had 30-some kids. And the last one I think was, I don't remember how many for sure. I think about 20. And the one here in Scott County.
So as you think back and remember those 2 years of teaching, what do you remember, or what's majorly different than school today, besides having a coal burning stove?
Well, nowadays the teacher teaches one grade level, usually one subject. We had all subjects, all 8 grades. You gave the tests and everything. And we had the county superintendent gave a test each year.
To your students?
And to the students to see who, especially the 8th grade students, to see who could be valedictorian and salutatorian or whatever.
So once the year started, you were on your own with 20 or 30 students?
Yes.
And the county superintendent provided textbooks for you?
For the teacher is all.
Just the teacher?
Mm-hmm. No, the kids had to buy their books and stuff like that. Or I suppose they did. I never did really know whether they did or not. Come to think about it.
But they just came with their books.
They just came with their books.
And what time did school start approximately?
Started at 9 o'clock and let out at 4.
And do you have any unique stories to share about your 2 years teaching?
Not really. It was, we had our ups and downs every other day or so, whatever happened. I had, in both schools, I had an extra smart boy. Both schools were boys that were really smart, that lots of times they helped. I would have them help when I was having class with one group. Why, I'd have him help with any of the other kids that needed a question answered.
Did you have children that were difficult to deal with in terms of discipline?
Oh, yes. I think every school does. Had some sweet ones and had some that were ornery.
Okay.
As you can see, many of the challenges that we face today in education are the same challenges that my grandmother faced in 1944 when she was teaching in a one-room school. And some of those challenges were equity. And I want to finish with, as we talk about equity in our schools. Kansas placed Kansas valued our schools, and as you can tell from the work and the effort and the money that was put into our schools across the state, from the mid 1800s until today. But until the 1900s, only a small percentage of children finished more than a rudimentary education, and some children, such as disabled and Black children, were excluded from public schools. In addition, compulsory education or post-compulsory attendance laws were usually ignored. World wars made leaders more concerned about the level of adult literacy in the nation, and as a result, more money was devoted to education and compulsory attendance laws were strengthened. Black children began attending schools in higher numbers, but many attended segregated schools. Disabled students were still not included in public education to a great extent. Because special education laws were approved in a piecemeal fashion, only about 50% of students who needed special education services were receiving them in 1974. Therefore, the legislature passed the Special Education for Exceptional Children's Act in 1974. School districts were given until 1979 to develop education programs for all handicapped students within their districts. Equality for educators. I'm sure many of you didn't know that it was a common practice for school districts to differentiate pay for male and female employees. An example from 1916 stated male teachers were to be paid $90 per month, while female teachers were to be paid $75 a month. This was a common practice until the Professional Negotiations Act was passed in 1970. Continuing the equality, true equality for all children. In 1896, the Supreme Court ruled in Plessy versus Ferguson that racially segregated public facilities were legal so long as the facilities for Blacks and whites were equal. The ruling constitutionally sanctioned laws barring African Americans from sharing the same buses, schools, and other public facilities as whites, known as Jim Crow laws, and established separate but equal doctrine that would stand for the next 6 decades, until 1954 in the Brown versus Board of Education Topeka ruling, a Supreme Court case in which the justices ruled unanimously that racial segregation of children in public schools was unconstitutional. Brown versus Board of Education was one of the cornerstones of the civil rights movements and helped create the precedent that separate but equal education and other services were not in fact equal at all. Equality in funding for public schools has also been addressed through the Kansas Supreme Court multiple times in our history. The most recent cases addressed adequate and equitable funding were Montoya and the Gannon cases. A resolution was reached as long as the Kansas legislature continues to adequately and equitably fund our schools. We still struggle today with equality in our schools. The challenges are highlighted with COVID. Not all students have access to the internet, the technology required, and not all parents can provide the assistance our students need during remote instruction. Our educators are doing everything they can to provide a high-quality education our communities deserve. Educators are currently working 12 to 14 hours a day trying to meet the needs of all students. I'm extremely proud of the work Kansas educators are doing in the challenging times we live. I'm going to close with this thought. The challenges of equality still exist today. A student's zip code shouldn't determine the quality of their educational experience. I believe we must continue to work together to achieve equality for all students. Thanks for allowing me to join you today as you celebrate your 100th birthday.
Thank you so much, Mark. Our next speaker that's here today is Kathy Bush. She is the chairperson for the Kansas State Board of Education. She represents District 8, which is the Wichita-Sedgwick County area, and we would like to welcome her to our celebration today.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me and allowing me to join you for this centennial celebration. It's really amazing and really exciting. I liked Mark's presentation and really took us through the history and did a nice job of thinking back of where we've come from and where we have to go and what we yet have to do, which is still a lot to do. So if we could get my PowerPoint up on the screen, and we'll have a little conversation as we move through here. I am currently on the State Board of Education. I happen to be chair. And before we get to this specific quote, let me tell you just briefly. Mark talked a lot about equity and about the schools and the school finance cases and so on that have gone on over the years in the state of Kansas. The governance structure in the state of Kansas, as far as how schools are governed, all school districts, and there's currently right now 286 school districts, they all have a locally elected Board of Education, and there are 7 members on that individual Board of Education, and those folks are the elected officials, and then they have the structure within their own district that they support the school with the superintendent, building administration, and of course, most importantly, their teachers and what they're doing with their children. And the State Board of Education we represent throughout the state. Each one of us represent 4 Senate seats throughout the state. So I represent a very densely populated area, but it's the same, but a very small geographic area. Whereas my colleague in Western Kansas represents a huge geographical area, but it's about the same population. So we set policies and guidelines that mainly have to do with teacher licensure. Mark mentioned the teacher licensure when that changed, and there was a centralized structure for teacher licensure in the state of Kansas. We also work on accreditation. Again, Mark mentioned that. Accreditation is a big function of what the State Board of Education does. And also we establish the standards that are taught within the schools. Now, local school boards select the curriculum that is taught at their particular school. So those are some of the big differences between the State Board of Education and the local Board of Education. Now, if you think about where we've come from many, many years ago, over a century ago, much more over a century ago, and where we are now, and probably most of us are familiar with the K-12 education. And we've basically had elementary schools, and then for a period of time, we did junior high schools and high schools. Junior high schools mostly have morphed into middle schools, but we still kind of have that same structure of those 3 main components of schooling for our kids. Equity continues to be an issue, as Mark mentioned. And so as we think about the current time, and then I'm going to go into the future, one of the things that as a State Board of Education that we talked about is, and those of you that remember John F. Kennedy, and he had this quote when in the 1960s we made the decision to go to the moon. And the moon, we called it the moonshot at that point in time, and we didn't begin to have a clue of how we were going to go about doing that. So as we think about, and the State Board thinks about, how do we move into the future, we choose to think about John F. Kennedy's charge to the nation of how are we going to change things so we can move forward. So we started on a process, and if we go to the next slide, please. We started on a process at the State Board of Education where we went out throughout the state in 2015. We went out throughout the state and really took a look at what are people around the state of Kansas. Mark mentioned, and it is still very strong today. People in the state of Kansas are very supportive of our Kansas public schools. Now, if you go throughout the country, that you can't say that every place, but in Kansas, we are supportive of our public schools. So we took the charge to say, okay, what do we need to take a look at in our Kansas public schools, and what do our fellow Kansans feel? And our question that we ask, what are the skills and attributes and abilities of a successful Kansan? And if you remember, some of you will remember this, but we've kind of came off of a time of No Child Left Behind, which had some very good attributes, and then, in my professional and personal opinion, left a little be desired. But one of the things when we asked this question, and these folks were educators, they were parents, they were community members, and what they said is those attributes and skills that represent a successful Kansan, and we chose the target age of a 24-year-old. Well, they said 23% of that is academic skills. So academic skills is important. But then they said 70% are non-academic skills. Now, if you think of that, of where we are now, we were really during No Child Left Behind, I feel like very underperforming in our non-academic skills. And that's what our Kansans told us. They said, yes, academic skills are important, but we really need to really focus more on non-academic skills. Some folks call those soft skills, some folks call those employability skills. So we've got a good representation, thousands of Kansas that responded to this. One of the things we noticed is that our business communities, we didn't have as much response from our business communities as we wanted. So we went back out, and the next slide shows what our business community told us. And if you take a look at the business community, to me, this was surprising. The business community felt even more strongly that we needed to have an increased emphasis on non-academic skills. And again, that was surprising. They said still academic skills are important, but we've really got to focus on those non-academic skills. So we took that information. We came back as a state board as we visited throughout the state and took that information and began to craft what do we want the future of Kansas schools to look like. If we could go to the next slide. And one of the things that you'll see there's about 6 things here that they really told us that they wanted to see. That one of the first ones, I'll just go through these. Kansas children need quality preschool, including all-day kindergarten. Well, we now have fully funded all-day kindergarten, but we're working, the State Board of Education is working with the Children's Cabinet to really expand our quality pre-K programs, and felt that was very important. Felt like changes need to be made to address school culture. We're continuing to work on that a variety of ways. We needed new roles for counselors and social workers. They needed to be more integrally involved with our students. There needed to be greater collaboration between schools and businesses. How do we work together to get our kids prepared? And then we needed to be able to reorganize our schools around the students and not just the system, which we have a tendency to do sometimes. And community service needed to play a bigger role in what our students learn. And they felt like this would help get to some of those non-academic skills. Next slide, please. We worked with the University of Kansas again on these non-academic skills and began to think, okay, these are our Kansas CAN competencies. You see, we still have the cognitive skills. Those continue to be important. Within those cognitive skills, you'll look and you'll see problem solving, creative thinking, maybe a little different than some of the rote learning. The rote learning is still important, but there's some other things. And then you have the intrapersonal skills and the interpersonal skills. So those began to be a focus as far as the non-academic skills and what can we work on. And I think if you look at those, you can see some very important skills for our students, not only to be successful in school, but to be successful when they get into post-secondary and into the work environment. We go to the next slide, please. And we had an interesting process we went through. If you remember back to those Kansas CAN competencies, we had the process where we went and we asked literally over 10,000 folks to talk about, of those competencies that you just saw, what are the most important. And the bigger the word, the more that particular skill was identified as an important skill. Well, you can see right away perseverance was one of the big ones. But if you look at some of the other ones that over and over and over begin to come out, was the self-regulation, integrity, initiative, empathy. Then we get into adaptability, critical thinking, self-efficacy, problem solving, and then there's a whole host of others. So as we think about moving into the future, we have to think about some of these interpersonal and intrapersonal skills as we begin to work with our kids and getting them into the next generation of schooling and of work. Next slide, please. And then we asked our students. We got this information from adults throughout Kansas. Then we asked our students what they felt were the highest need as far as competencies. And you can see we surveyed over 7,300 Kansas students. And if you take a look at this particular slide, you can see across the board the overall highest ranking competency was sustained attention and self-regulation. And then if you look throughout, I mean, it's divided between males and females, and then 6th, 9th, and 12th grade. So you can look at the various things. Initiative had a tendency to be fairly high, but then some of the other ones that jump out were assertiveness, self-efficacy and goal setting, conflict management. So these were competencies the students said that they needed. And again, these are students that were in the public schools starting 6th grade up through 12th grade. So these are competencies identified by our students. Go to the next slide, please. So we went back, we took this information, the State Board of Education, and we went back and established a new vision for the State Board of Education. And you can see what we established was that Kansas would lead the world in the success of each student. Now you're going to sit there and you're going to say each student. That was very purposeful by the State Board of Education. We didn't want to say every student. We wanted to say each student, because each student has their gifts and talents, and it's our responsibility to make sure that we focus on those gifts and talents of each student. So that is currently our vision for the state of Kansas as far as what we want to see. And then next, you'll see on the next slide, you'll see our mission statement, which has some components that we had. It says a successful Kansas high school graduate has. And the first 4 are ones that we already had: academic preparation, cognitive preparation, technical skills, and employability skills. What we heard loud and clear when we went throughout the state was that Kansans wanted to include civic engagement. They wanted our students to know how to be engaged in the community. And then we talked about this being successful in post-secondary education. As we began to focus on post-secondary, not just going to college. Going to college is important, but being inclusive of post-secondary. And this includes an attainment of an industry-recognized certification or in the workforce, but without the need of remediation. So that is our mission statement. If you go on to the next slide. So when we created this vision for the state of Kansas, we looked at 5 state outcomes, and we have asked all of our districts to have data, collect data on each of these 5 outcomes. I'm actually going to start with high school graduation rate, because that's probably about the only one you see. That's a pretty traditional measure of the success of not only a student, but of a school, is high school graduation rate. So that continues to be important. And we do want all of our students to graduate. And if you kind of go back to when Mark was talking, you think about the high school graduation rates, everybody talks about how woeful our high school graduation rates are right now. Well, if you go back into the 60s, those high school graduation rates were maybe 60%, might have been more of like 55%. And some of that is what Mark alluded to as far as the equity piece. Not only did we not have our students with disabilities in school, if we did, they weren't graduating. Many of our students of color were not graduating. Their rates were woefully low. So again, one measure is high school graduation rate. Then we looked at kindergarten readiness. And remember, I talked about enhancing our preschool education. So we really want to look at how prepared are our students coming in. We actually now have a statewide measure that we use for kindergarten readiness. The social and emotional growth, we really wanted to look at how are our students improving. This includes those components of those competencies I talked about a little bit ago. Social emotional growth is the responsibility of the district. We decided not at a state level to establish a measure that we look at overall across the state, but we want local districts to look at this, and we will look at how they're measuring that. Then we established individual plans of study that each student's starting in 7th grade, but by 8th grade for sure. A lot of folks start this in 6th grade. We'll have an individual plan of study that they will be looking at the students' interests, looking at what their talents are, and then they begin to develop that plan of study that's not only for high school, but is to carry them on into post-secondary. We are working now with our Kansas Board of Regents to allow this plan of study to go on to the post-secondary institution so that those post-secondary institutions can look at that plan of study and take a look at it and see how do we help support this student. Now, that doesn't mean it's not going to change, because, I don't know about you guys, but when I was 16 years old, I really didn't have a clue what I wanted to be when I grew up. So those plans do change, and they can change, and it's important, but we want our students to look at their gifts and their talents and plan accordingly. And then the last one I'll talk about is post-secondary completion. This is a totally new measure that the state of Kansas has created. It's actually an innovative measure that what we do is we look at 2 years after a student has graduated from high school. We get data from the Student Clearinghouse data and see if a student has either completed some kind of a certificate, industry recognized certificate, or they are still in a community college or a technical college or have graduated from there, or they are still in a post-secondary institution and completing that. So we look at a district's post-secondary completion rate. That is part of their accreditation system. So these are some new outcomes. Some of these are new. Most of them are new. The high school graduation rate is not. If we could go on to the next slide. All of this information came from the Georgetown Center on Education and Workforce, and it's very interesting data. And what this has shared with us, and they did it on each individual state. Each individual state, to meet the workforce readiness, needs to have, in Kansas, our rate is between 70 and 75% of our students need to either have a bachelor's, master's, or PhD, or an associate degree or certification that can meet the work requirements of the state of Kansas. The other 25 to 30%, those students would be in the military, apprenticeships, family businesses. So to be successful, we need to have this. We are not at this rate right now. At a statewide rate, we're kind of at 50%. So this is still an aspirational goal. We have to continue to focus on this and not only look at how are our students graduating from high school, but how are they doing with either those certificates or associate degrees or the bachelor's, so they are prepared for a world of work and to be successful and move into the middle class after they get out of school. So this is where we're focusing our work. We go to the next slide. So to succeed in a modern economy, students need a mix of specific and general education and skills. So the next few slides I'm going to show you provide us with some interesting data. So if we can go to the next one, please. So when we think about moving into the future, we think about what kind of skills, how do we need to change our schooling itself, or what kind of skills. So we asked business and industry, what skills are lacking in high school, 2-year and 4-year college program graduates. So this was information we got from our business and industry. We'll start with the high schools first. So if we take a look at the next slide. So this is skills that they say are lacking. This is our high school graduates. I want you to kind of, because I'm not going to leave this up very long, but kind of look at about the first 5. So you see the high school graduates are lacking. 80% of them are lacking professionalism and work ethic. 75% are lacking teamwork and collaboration skills. And then you can see the verbal communication, the ethics and social responsibility, and then the critical thinking and the problem solving. So these are important as far as our high school graduates. And let's go on to our 2-year programs and what they say these students are lacking. from these programs. These are the 2-year college graduates. You'll see some very similar kinds of things that they feel are lacking. Again, professionalism and work ethic, that's a pretty high percentage. Teamwork and collaboration, again, a high percentage. Then the verbal communication, then you go down into the critical thinking and problem solving, you see written communication pop up into the top 5 here. And then if we go on to the 4-year college graduates, on the next slide. Okay, here, if we talk about what they're lacking, verbal communication pops to the top. And then teamwork or collaboration, professionalism, work ethic, written communication. And again, we've got critical thinking and problem solving. So if you go to the next slide. I point that out because when you think about how we need to move into the future, we need to think about those skills. What can we do as we move into the future of schools to help provide those opportunities for students to learn those skills? So Kansas has put together, we are working on a school redesign project. We currently have 5 phases. We started with our Mercury 7 schools, so there were 7 districts. And within each of those districts, we asked at least an elementary school and a secondary school to be involved in redesign. We've gone through Gemini to Gemini 2 to Apollo, and now we're in Apollo 2. So next slide, please. And the redesign is based on these 4 principles, and I'll just touch base on these real quickly. Student success skills. This goes back to those competencies. Actually, those competencies are woven into all 4 of these pillars, but it's an integrated approach to develop student social and emotional learning. And then personalized learning, having teachers support students to have choice over their time, pace, and path and place. So in other words, let's do a better job of personalizing the learning for the students. And then family, business, and community partnerships that are mutually beneficial for the schools and for the community. And then real world applications. Our students need to understand that the learning that they do have a place in the real world. So project-based learning, greater emphasis on internships and civic engagement. That makes learning relevant. And I think my next slide is my final one. So across Kansas right now, these are our school districts that are involved in redesign. So you can see we have some clusters in some parts of the state, but we have the entire state of Kansas represented when we're working on redesign. So we're working specifically with these districts, but we're also working in general with all of our schools through our accreditation process. So as we think of the current state of education, as we move to the future, we've got to think of those competencies, and we've got to think of how we're going to move forward and get students better prepared for our future. I think what's going on right now, Mark mentioned the COVID pandemic, and our technology, our teachers and our students are learning a whole lot more about technology than they ever have before. And I think what we'll be seeing is some changes along with the technology that's going to drive some change in our schools too. The first one might be we may never have snow days again. Everybody goes, oh my goodness, snow days might look different, but there will be some other things, I have no doubt. Okay, well, thank you very much for the time to share with you and to talk about the current state of education and on into the future. Thanks.
And thank you, Kathy. Hello, everyone. My name is Bailey Hardy. I'm an officer of the IOTA chapter of Kappa Delta Pi, and I have the honor of sharing with you our time capsule. For our 100th anniversary, we decided sealing a time capsule with current artifacts, newspaper clippings, and maybe even a mask would be a good way to celebrate. Our birthday celebration was supposed to happen back in March, but due to the current pandemic, we have the opportunity to host an online celebration today instead. After we are able to formally seal the time capsule, it will be held in the Dobbs one-room schoolhouse on the Emporia State campus. Every 10 years, it will be opened and added to the 2 by the current KDP members of the chapter. Since we are still unable to meet in person, a few KDP members and I would like to share our memories, reasons why we teach, and quotes from famous past KDP members and teachers to symbolize what will be in the time capsule. We will start with Calliope Ames.
Hello. So I would, if I had something to put in the time capsule, put the case from my iPad that I got my sophomore year of high school. I think that one of the most interesting things about growing up as a student from 2002 to 2015 was experiencing the movement from projectors with the transparencies to Elmos to smartboards. And then when I was a sophomore in high school, we went one-to-one. And so we also were moving from iPad carts and laptop carts to every student having personal access to technology. And now today, I'm working in a 5th grade classroom interning as an Emporia State student teacher. And these students are also learning one-to-one. And sometimes we're learning remotely through Zoom. So I think it's so interesting to see how the age of information and innovation has really found its way into schools. I also want to read a quote to you, moving away from technology. This was from Malcolm X. He says, "Education is our passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to the people who prepare for it today." So I believe that this quote is the foundation of my personal inspiration to teach. My whole life, I've worked toward being an educator. As I grew in my understanding of the profession, I went from simply wanting to teach math and reading skills to wanting to help children. However, today, I know that my philosophy of education is rooted in the idea that education is the passport to the future. The work we do today as educators truly belongs to our students, not ourselves, as we guide children into the future that they create. And I believe that that is the most awesome legacy of education.
Thank you, Calliope. Next, we will hear from our current president, Chelsea Williams.
Hi, everyone. I think something that I would put into the time capsule would be a copy of a little girl that was drawn by my 4th grade teacher that she drew just for me. I have been inspired by so many teachers throughout my life, especially as a non-traditional student. I have worked as a paraeducator. I have substitute taught. I have come into contact with many, many teachers in the state of Kansas that are amazing. The 3 that I think made the most impact on me were teachers that I had through elementary and high school. The first one was Sandra Ricketts. She taught at Almont Elementary, and she was my 4th grade teacher. The second one was Dennis Switsky. He was my human anatomy and homeroom teacher when I was in high school at Seaman High School. And the third one was Timothy Collins, and he was my sophomore English teacher at Seaman High School, and he is currently a sophomore English teacher at Seaman. I just really think they made a huge impact on how important it is to read and to be the best person that you can be. They really taught me that it doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. You can do anything in your life that you put your mind to. And that is something that I want to instill in my students in my own classroom. I do want to share a quote with you today from Helen Keller that I think is really relevant to education and our society as a whole right now. She stated that education should train the child to use his brains to make for himself a place in the world and maintain his rights, even when it seems that society would shove him into the scrap heap. I think this pertains to a lot of our children and high school students and everyone today, with education switching back and forth from being in person to virtual to hybrid. We need to remember that no matter what, we are always there for our students and our children that we teach, and we can always help them through anything that they have to get through.
Thank you, Chelsea. Now we will hear from a past president, Lauren Taphorn.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lauren Taphorn. I was the president of Kappa Delta Pi last year, so I got to be president through the crazy transition to COVID. I was also the one that was in charge of planning this event originally, as it was intended to be in person. And I would like to share with you today some of my fondest memories of Kappa Delta Pi and why I teach, because they're very related. So some of my fondest memories of Kappa Delta Pi are the people that I've gotten to know and that I've gotten to work with. First, as being a junior member, I got to know the older members. I had a friend in the organization that got me involved, and getting to see these amazing teachers to be and what they were doing, it just inspired me to work hard and look forward to the day that I got to be in their place and that I got to actually be in the classroom. And it just kind of encouraged me through those first 2 years of general education classes and the transition to college and all of that. And now I'm finally in that position to where I am a student teacher right now. And I was the president last year, and getting to reverse those roles, whereas now I am getting to mentor and talk to young teachers and see these students that are coming in with wonderful ideas and creativity and passion for teaching, and getting to watch them grow. I've got to watch many of our junior members grow from being junior members to being full members to being officers, and just getting to know them and their philosophies and their personalities. And it just gives me such hope for the future in education as I get to know these teachers. And I think the reason that I enjoy that so much is also the reason that I enjoy teaching so much, is the connections that you get to build with students. If I could include anything in the capsule, I would probably include the things that students have given me, because that's why I teach. It's for the students. And in 2 days, I will end my student teaching semester, and I have to say goodbye to the students that I've been working with for the past 3 months. And I am already very sad about that. And a student today just gave me a letter, and in it she wrote about how she loves me as much as I love her. And that right there was why I taught. In that moment, I knew that I'm where I'm supposed to be, and that this is definitely what I want to do with my life, because the impact that we make in our students' lives, even if we don't see it, is there. And that's just incredible to me. And I also have a quote that I would like to share with you from John Dewey. And it says, "If we teach today's students as we taught yesterday's, we rob them of tomorrow." I really like that quote because it's so true. We can't teach our students for today. We have to teach them for tomorrow. And that means we have to get to know them, and that we have to use their passions to make our lessons and our activities better. And that's something that I've definitely been learning and continue to learn as I work with these students, and learning how I can use their interests and their passions to make my lessons more engaging and make my activities more applicable to their lives. So.
Thank you, Lauren. In the words of Albert Einstein, it is the supreme art of the teacher to awaken joy in creative expression and knowledge. I owe my aspiration of becoming a teacher to my grandmother, who was also a teacher. She taught me patience, kindness, and I aspire to be a great teacher like her. If I were to include something in the time capsule, I would probably put my favorite children's book, which is The Giving Tree, in it, because I would make my preschool teacher read that to me all the time. Now I would like to introduce Dean Brewer, the Dean of the Teachers College here at Emporia State University, to provide closing remarks.
First, I just want to say, wow, this has been a packed hour with amazing stories and information and just inspiration. So thank you to each one of you for sharing. And I just want to say thank you to everyone for sharing their time today to celebrate the 100th birthday of Kappa Delta Pi. As an alumni of KDP myself, and also of the Teachers College and Emporia State University, I'm quite proud of our rich history that we have here related to KDP and to teacher preparation. I specifically want to give a huge shout out to Dr. Melissa Reed and Dr. Heather Caswell for their ongoing dedication to our KDP student organization here at Emporia State University, and their continued efforts to make sure that we always have quality experiences for our ESU teacher education candidates. They go above and beyond. KDP is a highly active organization within the Teachers College and on the Emporia State University campus, as witnessed by our student members who spoke today. And I just want to thank this group of students for always being at the ready to assist with anything and everything that is needed. I need something, whether it be postcards written to prospective students or current students, they're right there to help with whatever it may be. They're a fantastic group. Their futures and the futures for ESU's IOTA chapter of Kappa Delta Pi are bright, and may that legacy remain strong. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much to everybody who presented today. I will give a few shout outs. I also would like to ditto Dean Brewer about Dr. Reed and Dr. Caswell, not just for being our advisors, but being part of our organization today in this moment, because I know that it was a really special moment for you to stick it out all the way through to get to our 100 years. And maybe you weren't there 100 years ago. I know you weren't, but you have been here for this part, and it's so special that we get to share our experience through your guidance. And we would not be the organization that we are without you too. So thank you very, very much. Thank you to Amber Ellington for being here and supporting us through and being our advocate through the national organization, and to Mark Farr and his grandmother. That was so cool to get to hear from, not just you, but your family. And as you shared with us about where teaching started in Kansas compared to where we are now. Thank you to Kathy Bush for helping us appreciate where we are and where Kansas is looking forward to. I really, really have loved growing up in Kansas education and seeing that we are headed in a really special direction. And it is innovative, and that's really special. A couple other things before we sign off for today. This committee is made of the people who put this together is more than the people that you've heard from today. There's been a whole load of people behind the scenes who have been really involved in making this happen. So I want to shout out to Lauren, who you did meet, for being part of this all the way back in October 2019 when we started trying to put this together. And then to Bailey for being such a great rock for me as I tried to lead everything. She really stepped in and took the reins on our time capsule and really put in a lot of work to make this happen. And then finally, we have been on Instagram and Twitter sharing some really neat glimpses into the past of education and at the legacy that different people and groups have put to making education such a powerful thing in our community. So if you would like to dig into that past, those pictures are still there for you to look into. And we have a scavenger hunt bingo card that you can, at your leisure, fill out and dig into that history of Kansas education, not just through Kappa Delta Pi, but also in Emporia and all of Kansas. So I really hope you take the opportunity to do that. You would get to see so many unique things that are home in Emporia and on campus, like the Dobbs one-room schoolhouse, where we will be keeping our time capsule. So I really hope that you take that opportunity. So that is everything today. Happy 100th birthday, Kappa Delta Pi IOTA. We did it. And that is all we have for you. Thank you so much for tuning in with us.